Hi guys, so today I'm going to be taking a look at some more of your tracks that you've sent me in. Still got quite a few to go through, so you have to bear with me while I try to get through them all. Okay, so first one I'm going to look at today is called Arcade Runner, and this is from Baali Soda. So I'll have a quick run through of it and then we'll get to reviewing it. Okay, so yeah, it's quite a nice track there. I would say about the melodies, the melodies seem very sort of simple sounding. I would definitely go back in. I mean, there's no notes that are wrong, but they just sound very simple. So I would try to make them a bit more exciting by changing a few of the notes around in the melodies. The transitions, you've got 3 or 4 different parts of the track there that you can clearly see are separate parts. One of the parts is an harp. It plays at the start of the track, but it plays at 2 minutes 40 as well. That's a nice harp as well. I like that pattern. I like the sounds. But I would definitely look at using some more effects and stuff, some crashes and sweeps up, just so the listener knows that you're moving on to a different section in the track. What would also as well say is the kick seems to be double hitting. It seems to be, I'm not sure if you've got like a reverb on there or a delay, but when the kick hits, it seems like there's 2 kicks hitting at once, just a couple of milliseconds apart. So if you've got your reverb on your kick, I would definitely bring that off completely, and I would just have your kick dry sitting in the track. If not, I would look at maybe changing your kick sound, because it does sound like it's double hitting in the track. Arrangement, yeah, it's alright, you've got plenty of arrangement in there, but again, move going into from one section to another, make sure you're using effects and filters and stuff to move along. So the next track I'm going to look at here now is a song called Skyunner, which is electro, I think. I'm not sure what the guy's name is. I'll stick it in the description after, but I'll give it a quick playthrough, see what it is. Okay, so quite a lot going on in that track. One thing I will say is there's quite a lot of chord changes in there, and they're all they're changing quite regularly. There's no real consistency. You need to give a real consistency. What you could do with this track, you could easily split this track up into 2 or 3 different tracks. Take out some of the chords. Sometimes with changing chord structures, you can be a little too clever, and it can just confuse people. But there is some nice chord progressions in there. There's some nice sounds in there as well. One thing that I'll say is some great riffs in there. One thing that I will say is the drums need a little bit of work with regards to mixing. So your kick's way too loud in the mix. It's really thumping above everything else. Your snare's very dry as well. Your snare's just very dry. You need to get some reverb on that to get to sit back in the mix. And your hi-hats, again, are very loud and very dry. So maybe add some delay, some reverb to the hi-hats and bring them right back in the mix as well. But at the moment, yeah, your drums are sitting on top of the mix. They're sitting very dry on top of the mix. So you've got some great sounds there. You've got some great effects on the sounds. And then you've just got this drum beat. It sort of sits out. So you need to make it sit back in the mix, using the volume and whatnot to make it sit in more. Okay, so what's this one? Oh yeah, I think you sent me a track for this one. Yeah. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Okay, so this guy asked me to check out just his SoundCloud in general. So this is ZX or Zeeks. So we'll just pick the first one there. We'll just give it a quick playthrough. Okay, yeah, so a nice track there. Couple of things I'll say then. So your pad sound that starts very early is only one note, only playing one note at a time. It's very, very loud in the mix. Now you can have a pad that plays one note at a time, but it will be a pedal pad, so it will be repeating throughout the track, but it will be there, really, really low in the mix. People shouldn't really be able to pick it out as the main prominent part of the track. So I will definitely bring that back in the mix, bring it right down in volume, and it's very, very sidechained as well. So take some of that sidechain off as well. Maybe add some reverb on it as well to make it sit more in the mix, and just bring that right down so that it's not standing out above everything else in the track. And at about 140, you've got the pad playing by itself with the bass, and its sidechain is really, really pumping. So you really need to bring that sidechain down on it. There is a nice little bass change there around 140. You have the little bass riff is nice in the track as well. I will also say the kick might not be right for the track. I think the kick is very sort of top endy and thumpy. I would definitely maybe change that and try go for something a little more bottom endy and a little more sort of 80s rather than having it really, really high in the mix. Get just something a bit more low endy. But apart from that, it's a nice track. So next track, Synth of the Ritual. Okay, so just got a quick playthrough, and then we'll have a review of it. Okay, yeah, so really nice track there. There's not a lot that I could really add to that or take away from that. It's it's a complete track. It's a very good track. Some great synths in there. Some great progression is great in the track. There's plenty of sort of changes. The arrangement is spot on. The mixing is very good as well. If I was to say anything about it, it would be really nitpicking because, like I said, it is a really good track. So well done on that there. Keep it up. Okay, yeah, another really nice track. You can definitely tell that's a finished product. Nice mix. It's mixed very well. Some great melodies and transitions in there. Arrangement is spot on. There is a little change, a bass change around 50 seconds, which I think is really, really nice in the track. It just drops out the bass and plays some different notes. But again, it's a very well polished off track. Well done, and keep up the good work. So next I'm going to move on to some tracks that have been sent in just to download. So this first one here is called You Better Run. And this is Michael Newman, which I think is Panhandle Demos. And so we'll give this a whiz through and then we'll get some feedback on it. Okay, really nice track there. Loving the guitars. The guitar sound absolutely spot on. Really, really 80s sounding. Actually reminds me a little bit of the Crocodile Dundee theme. Just a little bit. But yes, really, really nice sounding there. Some nice mixing on it as well. Great use of tom fills, throughout the track. So, massive improvement on the last track that we listened to. That's a really, really nice track. So well done on that, and then keep up the good work. So next we go to Alec A, and he's called this one Pro EQ. Okay, really nice track there from Alec A. There's a couple of different ways you could really go with this. One of the things I would say is there's a nice ARP that kicks in after about 20 seconds or so, and it works really well with the bass. Some great sounds in there as well. Some of the leads that kick in towards the end are slightly high, sort of sitting on top of the mix. I'll definitely bring them back in volume. The riff that you start with, that riff there, I would maybe change that to a pad and bring that out with a riff. Just change that to a low filtered pad, because when your ARP comes in, your ARP and that are clashing with each other. So change that to a pad and let your ARP come in as normal, and then when your bass comes in, they'll all sound really, really, really good together. That's the only thing that I would maybe try with that track. But apart from that, nice track. Okay, so this one's called Zenith. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. I'm not sure whether that's meant to be whether that's pronounced with a U or whether it's like Slvmber or what. If you want to leave in the comments how you pronounce it, then I'll definitely make sure I get it right next time. But this is called Zenith. Okay, yeah, so another really nice track. It's definitely a finished product there. Some really nice sounds, well mixed. One thing I will say about this is there's some great use of the width of the track, some great panning effects in there. Everything's panned really nicely. There's a sort of high, sort of pitched frequency ghosty pad towards the end that plays. That's a really nice touch in there. It keeps sort of things moving on nicely. But again, an overall really nice track. Some great melody in there. Great sound choice as well. Some really nice vintage sounding stuff in there. So again, well done on that track. That's it really on that one. It's spot on. So last one we're going to go with Summer Drive Home. Okay, some really nice sounds in that track as well. I really love the bass pattern that you've gone with there. I would say the bass is too loud in the mix, so I'll definitely bring that down. Mixing in general needs a little look at. Some of the things are quite loud. And what you've got here is this is quite squashed. You can tell from by looking at the waveform here that this is very heavily limited. So maybe just dial back on that limiting a little bit. Let the give it a bit more dynamic range. Let the instruments breathe themselves rather than just having them peaking and squashing. Because synthwave's not really about that. If it was EDM or electro or deep house or any other of them genres, then we would squash it and we would pump it as hard as we could. But with it being synthwave, it's a little bit more laid back. Remember, in the 80s, they didn't have any of these limiters or anything like that, so you wouldn't really hear any tracks from the 80s, heavily limited. They would have a nice dynamic range, letting all the sounds breathe. So we'll definitely dial back on the limiting on the track, and I'll definitely take another look at the mixing. If you go back to one of the other tutorials, the mixing tutorials that I did, I will go back and take a look at that. And just like I said, the mixing's a little hot, but there's some nice sounds in there. I'm not sure about the last chord in your riff there, the one that goes very dark quickly. I would maybe have a look at that. Maybe we could change that up, and you could maybe use that dark note, as just before the drop or as a transition, just to mix things up a little bit. But again, so there is some nice sounds in there. The drums are all spot on. But again, I would look at the mixing. That's it really for that track. So that's it really for today's feedback sessions. I've still got quite a lot to go through, so guys, keep firing them over to me. I've been off. I've not been, you probably noticed there's not been as many videos this week. That's because I'm just finishing off another Synthwave album, which is going to be out very soon. I will definitely stick some samples and stuff up once it's ready to go on YouTube and whatnot. And you can have a listen to it again. There'll be more stuff put on my SoundCloud and whatnot. That about sums up this video, guys. Thanks for watching.